It took me 10 years to understand something that most people will never fully grasp in their entire lifetime. Not because it is hidden. Not because it is complicated. But because it requires silence, self-awareness, and honesty with yourself, 3 things most people avoid their entire lives. For years, I lived as if life was something I could negotiate with. I believed that if I acted correctly, if I explained myself properly, if I worked harder than everyone else, then life would eventually reward me with clarity, respect, and peace. But what I experienced instead was confusion, misunderstanding, emotional exhaustion, and a constant feeling that no matter how much I gave, it was never enough. I remember nights where I would replay conversations in my head over and over again, trying to figure out what I said wrong. I remember days where I would overthink someone's tone, someone's silence, someone's reaction, and build entire stories in my mind that were never even real. I was mentally living in situations that didn't exist, and emotionally reacting to things that were never in my control. And slowly, without noticing it, I was losing myself. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Every unnecessary explanation I gave, every reaction I had to things I couldn't control, every moment I tried to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. It all took something from me, and I didn't even realize it until I was already exhausted from my own thoughts. But here is the truth I eventually discovered through Stoicism. Life does not become easier when you control more. Life becomes easier when you stop trying to control what was never yours. And that realization changed everything. Before we go deeper into these lessons, I want you to understand something very clearly. This is not entertainment. This is mental training. If you listen carefully, and more importantly, if you apply even one of these lessons, the way you experience life will begin to shift. And if you find value in this kind of content, take a moment and subscribe to this channel, because everything here is built to strengthen your mind, not entertain your distraction. Now let's begin. Brain Lesson 1. Control what is yours, release what is not. One of the hardest lessons I ever had to learn was that most of my suffering came from things I had no control over. Not from failure, not from other people, but from my attachment to things I could never influence. I wanted people to understand me. I wanted people to see my intentions clearly. I wanted people to react to me the way I thought they should. And every time reality did something different, I felt frustration. But Stoicism breaks life into 2 categories that completely change everything. What is in your control? Your thoughts, your actions, your discipline, your response. And what is not in your control? Everything else. Other people's opinions, their behavior, their decisions, their emotions, their misunderstanding of you. And the moment I truly understood this, not intellectually, but emotionally, I began to notice something strange happening inside me. I started to slow down. I stopped reacting immediately. I stopped trying to fix every misunderstanding. I stopped explaining myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. Because I finally understood something simple but powerful. You cannot control how people interpret you. No matter how good your intentions are. No matter how carefully you speak. No matter how hard you try. People will always see you through their own perspective, not your reality. And when I stopped fighting that truth, I finally felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not because life got easier, but because I stopped making it harder. And this is where transformation begins. Not in changing the world, but in changing your response to it. Shushing face Lesson 2. Silence is not weakness, it is control. For most of my life, I believed silence meant defeat. I thought if I didn't respond, I was losing. If I didn't explain myself, I was misunderstood. If I didn't defend myself, I was weak. But Stoicism completely destroyed that belief. Because silence is not emptiness. Silence is control. When you respond to everything, you lose control of your energy. When you react to everything, you give people access to your emotions. When you try to explain yourself to everyone, you slowly lose your inner peace. And I learned something important. Not every battle deserves your voice. Not every opinion deserves your attention. Not every misunderstanding deserves your correction. Because most people are not listening to understand. They are listening to reply. And when I finally accepted that, I stopped wasting energy trying to be understood by everyone. Instead, I focused on being aligned with myself. Silence gave me something I never expected. Power. Not loud power, not aggressive power, but calm, unshakable presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need to prove anything, because it already knows its worth. Brick Lesson 3. Pain is a builder, not a destroyer. Pain is the one thing everyone tries to avoid. But no one becomes strong without it. For years, I thought pain meant something was wrong. I thought it was a signal that I was failing. But Stoicism taught me something completely different. Pain is not punishment. Pain is information. Pain is feedback. Pain is construction. Every difficult experience I went through later revealed something I needed to understand about myself. Every rejection showed me where my expectations were unrealistic. Every failure showed me where my discipline was weak. Every disappointment showed me where my attachment was too strong. But at the time, I didn't see it that way. At the time, I only saw suffering. And that is the mistake most people make. They experience pain, but they never extract meaning from it, and pain without meaning becomes suffering. But pain with meaning becomes growth. And once I understood that difference, I stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" And I started asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" And that one question changed everything. Because it turned pain into direction, not destruction. Brain Lesson 4. Your mind does not see reality, it creates it. One of the most difficult truths I had to accept in life is that I was never reacting to reality itself. I was reacting to my interpretation of reality. That sounds simple when you hear it, but in practice, it changes everything about how you live. Because most of the suffering I experienced in my life was not caused by events themselves, but by the meaning I attached to those events. Two people can experience the exact same situation. One person sees rejection as proof that they are not enough. The other sees rejection as redirection. One person sees failure as the end of the road. The other sees failure as feedback. One person sees criticism as an attack. The other sees it as information. The situation is the same, but the mind changes everything. And that is where Stoicism becomes powerful. Stoicism teaches you something that is both simple and uncomfortable. You are not disturbed by events, you are disturbed by your judgments about events. When I began to understand this, I started to observe my thoughts instead of obeying them. I noticed how quickly my mind would jump to conclusions. I noticed how easily I would assume the worst. I noticed how often I created problems that didn't even exist. And slowly, I began to separate myself from my thoughts. Not all thoughts are truth. Not all interpretations are reality. And not all feelings are facts. Once you understand this, you stop being controlled by every emotion that passes through you. You start to create space between what happens and how you respond. And in that space, you find freedom. Because now, life is no longer happening inside your head without control. You are finally participating in it consciously. Brick Lesson 5. Discipline is not restriction, it is freedom. For most of my life, I misunderstood discipline. I thought discipline meant limitation. I thought it meant suffering. I thought it meant forcing myself to do things I didn't want to do, but the deeper I went into Stoic thinking, the more I realized something completely different. Discipline is not punishment. Discipline is protection. Because without discipline, your life is controlled by impulses. You eat what you shouldn't eat. You delay what you should do. You react instead of responding. You escape instead of facing. And slowly, without realizing it, you lose control of your own life. But discipline reverses that. Discipline gives you structure when emotions are unstable. Discipline gives you direction when motivation disappears. Discipline gives you consistency when feelings change. And that is why discipline feels difficult in the beginning. Because it is not designed to make you comfortable. It is designed to make you powerful. When I started practicing discipline, I noticed something interesting. The more control I gained over my habits, the more freedom I felt in my mind. I was no longer constantly stressed about unfinished tasks. I was no longer overwhelmed by chaos. I was no longer reacting to life randomly. Instead, I was directing it, and that is the paradox most people never understand. Discipline limits your choices in the short term, but gives you freedom in the long term. Without discipline, you are free in theory but trapped in reality. With discipline, you are restricted in behavior but free in life. And once you experience that shift, there is no going back. Dotted line face Lesson 6. Stop seeking approval from people. Don't live your life. This lesson took me the longest to accept. Because as humans, we naturally want acceptance. We want validation. We want approval. We want people to understand us, support us, and agree with us, but the problem is this. The more you depend on approval, the less you trust yourself. I used to change my behavior depending on who I was around. I used to adjust my opinions so I wouldn't be rejected. I used to stay quiet even when I disagreed, just to avoid conflict. And slowly, I stopped being myself. I became a reflection of other people's expectations. But Stoicism forces you to confront a difficult truth. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will agree with you. And not everyone needs to, because their approval is not the measure of your worth. And their misunderstanding is not your responsibility. When I finally accepted this, something inside me became lighter. I stopped performing. I stopped explaining unnecessarily. I stopped chasing validation from people who had no idea what I was building in my life. And I started focusing inward. Because the only opinion that truly matters is the one you have of yourself when everything becomes silent. Ask yourself, am I living in alignment with my values? Or am I living in response to other people's expectations? Because one leads to peace, and the other leads to exhaustion. Hourglass Lesson 7. Time is the only thing you can never get back. There is something terrifying about time that most people avoid thinking about. It does not pause. It does not slow down. It does not wait. Every second that passes is gone forever. And yet, most people live as if they have unlimited time. They postpone their goals. They delay their growth. They waste their days on things that do not matter. And they convince themselves that they will start later. But Stoicism forces you to face reality. You are not guaranteed tomorrow. You are only guaranteed this moment. And when I truly accepted that, my entire mindset shifted. I started valuing time more than comfort. I started valuing progress more than entertainment. I started valuing discipline more than distraction. Because I realized something simple but powerful. Every day you waste is a version of your life you will never get back. And that means your time is not just passing. It is being spent. The question is, what are you spending it on? Fire final outro, the wake-up moment. If you are still here listening, then something inside you is already shifting. Because most people don't make it this far. Most people hear things like this and move on immediately, unchanged, unbothered, and exactly the same as before. But you didn't, and that matters, because awareness is the first step toward transformation. These 7 lessons are not just ideas. They are tools. Tools that can change how you think, how you respond, how you live, but only if you use them. Not tomorrow. Not someday. But now start small. When emotions rise, pause. When conflict appears, observe before reacting. When pain arrives, look for the lesson instead of the blame. When distraction calls, choose discipline instead. When approval tempts you, return to yourself. Because the goal is not to become perfect. The goal is to become aware. And from awareness, everything changes. If this message resonated with you, if it made you reflect even slightly, then take a moment and subscribe to this channel. Because this is where you don't just consume information, you rebuild your mindset. You strengthen your thinking, and you start taking back control of your life. And remember this, you are not behind, you are not lost, you are simply becoming aware. And that awareness changes everything.